Hello students, welcome to biology class. Today we are discussing chapter Transport in Plants. The objectives that we are covering in this video are means of transport, diffusion, facilitated diffusion and active transport. Plants do not have circulatory system. They need to move molecules not only to short distance but also to long distance. Water taken up by roots has to reach all parts of the plant up to the very tip of the growing stem. Transport over long distance proceeds through the vascular tissue, that is xylem and phloem. Transport of water and minerals occurs through xylem and is unidirectional, and the transport of food prepared by leaves occurs through the phloem and is multidirectional. In the plants, hormones or plant growth regulators, though are produced in small amounts, transported in a strictly polarized or unidirectional manner from where they are synthesized to other parts. There are three means of transport of material across the cell, that is diffusion, facilitated diffusion and active transport. Starting with the diffusion. Diffusion is defined as the movement of molecules from the region of high concentration to the region of low concentration. No energy expenditure takes place in diffusion. It is a slow process and does not depend on a living system. In case of a gas, each gas diffuses from a region of high partial pressure to that of low partial pressure. For diffusion to take place through a membrane, the membrane should be fully permeable. Diffusion is rapid in gases than in liquids. Next, discussing diffusion rate is affected by the following. First one is concentration gradient. Greater the gradient, the faster is the rate of diffusion. The second one is permeability of the membrane separating them. For diffusion to take place through a membrane, the membrane should be fully permeable to the molecules or ions. So, more will be the permeability of the membrane, more is the diffusion. The next is temperature. On increasing the temperature, the kinetic energy of the molecules is increased. Hence, increase the rate of diffusion. The next is pressure. On increasing the pressure, the rate of diffusion increases. Next is facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion is defined as the diffusion of substances with the help of special proteins present in the cell membranes without the expenditure of ATP energy. The membrane proteins act as facilitated molecules and provide sites at which such molecules cross the membrane. Concentration gradient should be present for facilitated diffusion to occur. There is no expenditure of energy since the movement of molecule is down the concentration gradient. It is used mainly to transport hydrophilic molecules across the cell membrane. The rate of facilitated diffusion depends upon, first one, size of substances. Smaller the size of the substances, faster will be the diffusion. The next one is solubility of substances. Solubility of substances in lipids. Since lipids are the major constituents of cell membranes, substances soluble in lipids diffuse through the membrane faster. Some important facts about the facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion is very specific. It allows the cells to select specific substances only for uptake. The second one is it is sensitive to inhibitors, as the inhibitors react with protein side chains and make the protein carriers inactive. The third one, it cannot cause net transport of molecules from low to high concentration, as this would require input of energy. The fourth point is transport rate is maximum when all the protein molecule transporters are used, that is when saturation occurs. Now discussing types of proteins which help in facilitated diffusion. Porins and aquaporins. Porins means pore. Porins are proteins that act as a pore through which molecules pass through cellular membrane. Aquaporins. Aqua means water and porin means pore. Aquaporins are protein molecules embedded in the cell membrane which allows the flow of water molecules. They are also known as water channels. Water channels are specialized to allow passage of water through them. Each water channel is surrounded by 8 different types of aquaporins. In this figure, we can see facilitated diffusion. Transport proteins are embedded in the cell membrane. Now these transport proteins help to transport the molecules from outside of the cell to the inner side of the cell. Next, discussing difference between porins and aquaporins. Porins are water-filled pores and channels found in the membranes of bacteria and eukaryotes. Aquaporins are a family of water channel molecules that facilitate water transport through cell membranes in response to osmotic gradient. Main function: transport hydrophilic molecules of various size and charges across the membrane passively. Aquaporin facilitate water movement across the plasma membrane freely. Specificity: porins allow hydrophilic molecules to pass through them, and aquaporins usually specific for water permeability and exclude the passage of other solutes. Porins transport hydrophilic molecules which are charged, and all aquaporins are impermeable to charged solutes. Next, discussing passive symport and antiport. Symport. Symport refers to movement of both molecules crossing the membrane in the same direction. Antiport refers to the movement of molecules in opposite direction. Uniport refers to the movement of molecules across a membrane independent of other molecule. In this figure, we can see these are the carrier proteins which are embedded in the membrane. Now, this arrow shows the movement of molecules only in one direction, and antiport here the opposite arrows show both the molecules move in opposite direction, and in symport both molecules cross the membrane in the same direction. Next is active transport. Now, it is a mode of transport which uses energies, involves carrier protein, and is against a concentration gradient. It is defined as a movement of particles against the electrochemical gradient with the expenditure of energy. Now, what is electrochemical gradient? An electrochemical gradient is a gradient of electrochemical potential, usually for an ion that can move across a membrane. The gradient consists of two parts: the chemical gradient or difference in solute concentration across a membrane, and the electrical gradient or difference in charge across a membrane. Some important facts about active transport. Active transport uses energy to pump molecules. Molecules are transported against a concentration gradient. Then molecules are carried but by membrane proteins. A carrier proteins are very specific, and these proteins are sensitive to inhibitors. This is an example of active transport. Sodium-potassium pump. Sodium-potassium pump is found in many cell membranes. Powered by ATP, the pump moves sodium and potassium ions in opposite directions, each against its concentration gradient. In a single cycle of the pump, 3 sodium ions are extruded from and 2 potassium ions are imported into the cell. Next is similarities and differences between facilitated diffusion and active transport. Facilitated diffusion and active transport. Facilitated diffusion needs a carrier protein and they are named as transporters or channels. Active transport needs a carrier protein and they are named as pumps. Facilitated diffusion is highly specific in nature. Active transport is also highly specific in nature. Both facilitated diffusion and active transport are saturable. Both are inhibited by competitive inhibitors. Facilitated diffusion, solutes are transported from high concentration to low concentration. In active transport, solutes are transported from low concentration to high concentration. No energy is needed in facilitated diffusion and energy is needed in active transport. Next is difference between diffusion and active transport. Diffusion is the passive movement of molecules along a concentration gradient of higher concentration to a lower concentration. Active transport is the movement of particles across a cellular membrane from a lower to a higher concentration by the use of metabolic energy. Diffusion occurs through a concentration gradient and active transport occurs against a concentration gradient. Diffusion is a passive process, does not require metabolic energy to transport molecules across the cell membrane. Active transport is an active process, requires metabolic energy for the transportation of molecules across the cell membrane. Water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, small monosaccharides and other small hydrophobic molecules are transported by diffusion. Proteins, ions, complex sugar and large cells are transported through the cell membrane by active transport. No net movement of molecule is observed after the establishment of equilibrium on either side of the membrane. No equilibrium of molecule is established. Diffusion maintains a dynamic equilibrium of water, gases, nutrients and waste in and out of the cell. Active transport allows the transportation of molecules like nutrients and waste against the concentration gradient. Thank you so much.